Good morrow, scholars. Sorry, I kind of got distracted yesterday. Um, after I came back and then left and then came back again. I was supposed to hang out with some friends, but they never showed up, so I came back home and then Pokemon Go had an update. Hi, kiddo. So I went walking for an hour or so, uh, and then I started watching Game of Thrones with my mom and my brothers, and I did some more lightsaber practice. Anyway, so what I was going to do, since I decided to add the final chapter to the second to last chapter, the penultimate chapter, I was going to do a sort of book review on Survive the Night. And I ultimately didn't yesterday because, like I mentioned, I just forgot. I actually forgot to call my friend Adam, who's not my brother Adam. But anyway, um, yesterday. So I'm going to have to do that today. My mind's all over the place. Anyway, so I would have uploaded something sooner, but I was thinking of like all these different topics. So I was going to make a list and check it twice of things I'd want to talk about in regards to this book. And ultimately, I decided not to do that because I feel like improv, although not my specialty or even something I'm good at, would be the best way to go since that fits the kind of person I am to begin with. Now, overall, it is a decent book. Sorry, come on. Reminds me of Frida. It's a decent book overall. The biggest complaint I have isn't the characters being unlikable for the most part, because in a horror movie, a lot of people they'll go out of their way, like the directors or even the actors, if they're so inclined, will go out of their way to make their characters unlikable so that when they finally do die, you're glad. Um, Spoilers if you haven't seen Game of Thrones or read the books by this point, but if that's the case, it's your fault. Um, See how many people cheered at the Purple Wedding when Joffrey died. They're cheering for a child's death. I mean, he was like 17, but still. He had the mental maturity of a 3-year-old. That was really mean. I apologize to all 3-year-olds. Anyway. Okay. What was I saying? You distracted me. Okay. So, there's a good reason for making characters unlikable. And I understand completely. However, I think this is the trope that I have in mind. It's called, 20 Minutes with Jerks. It's where in a horror movie, I get this as a book, but horror, the tropes still apply. It's called 20 Minutes with Jerks. What it refers to is the beginning of the horror story, let's say, where you get to know these characters and you see just how unlikable they are, so that later when they die, like I mentioned, you're enjoying their deaths. Now, this is a very dangerous thing. It's a double-edged sword. Because if you make your characters so unlikable that you're glad they're dead later, they might not, the audience might not make it to later in the first place to watch because they're just not invested emotionally with these characters. This book suffers from that a great deal. We had, about 15 or 16 chapters before anything major happened in terms of the plot. It should have been cut down to about 8 or 9, I feel. And the journey out should have been a bit more fleshed out. This, there was too much of it. I don't want to say it's like too much A to B. There wasn't enough meat on these bones, or their bones, considering how they died. That was a gruesome comment I just made. Do you know what I mean? Another issue I had was this book is essentially happening in the real world. Now, there is one movie, I'm afraid I've forgotten its name, but if you know it, please let me know down in the comments. It was a horror movie. My dad was watching it a while back, and in it, the characters, it's actually a little bit similar to this. I think they go to like this cabin out in the woods. No, it's not cabin in the woods. And they start disappearing one by one. And it's like this weird quantum mechanic where if they're not being observed by anybody, they just vanish. There was one scene where somebody had gone behind the fridge door, and I forget if it was them or the person. I think it was them. They just disappeared. And this movie never revealed what was going on. If it was something supernatural, if it was something paranormal, if it was aliens, if it was all in their heads, if there was some logical, real reason for all of this. It never revealed it. And it was great for that movie. Again, this is one of those things, it's a double-edged sword. Since this is supposed to be, relatively real-world situation, I feel like there should have been more talk about what these things were and where they came from. Admittedly, considering our protagonists, it makes more sense for there not to be any. I have to be unbiased, because all they're interested in is getting out alive. They don't need to know what it is they're facing, and we as an audience don't need to know what it is, but there comes a point in a story, or for certain stories as opposed to others, where the reasons behind the creature need to be known in order for the story to be taken seriously. Obviously, like I mentioned, it doesn't have to happen 100% of the time. There are some stories, like the one where, had they tried to reveal what was going on, it might have killed the story. I think that's one of the reasons, like the Blair Witch Project did so well, other than like the viral marketing and such, is, admittedly, we know what's going on, we know why it's going on, but it doesn't show us anything. We're just as lost. Well, not just as lost, but we're not in the dark as such, but we don't know much more than the characters in the movie do, and that's where a lot of the horror comes from. This one tried very much to do this, and I just feel like it didn't do it properly. If you disagree with me, let me know. I'm not saying like this detracts from the story, I'm just saying it didn't help it any, in my personal opinion. Another thing I feel like that should have been changed would be the deaths. Not so much how they happened, but more the order in which they occurred. I feel like Sam should have been the one to die where Woody was killed. And spoilers in case you didn't watch the series. And my reasoning is thus, which is a phrase I don't use often. Mozart, really? Okay. Sam, I think yeah, by that point it had been revealed that Sam cheated. Technically, they weren't together, but with what's her phrase, Shanna. Spoilers again if you haven't read this book or seen my series. Go back over there. I don't know what you're doing here. Um, it was at that point, like you see, as good a guy as he is, he's not as good as we were led to think. And there's this trope. I'm on TV tropes every single day, so forgive me if I confuse you. It's called redemption equals death, and I think there's an opposite or like an inverted version of that where death equals redemption, but I don't think that's what it's called. I'll have to go back and check. And I feel like Woody's death was the result of him basically picking up Casey and getting her out of the water in time, but not leaving enough time for himself to be saved. I feel like Sam, in his guilt, should have been the one to make the sacrifice. And I feel like it would have made a lot more sense story-wise because Woody doesn't get like his final words out before he gets pulled under. This would have been a very emotional scene for Casey and Sam. He just saved her. He's about to get out, and then he dies right in front of her. And he doesn't get to say, like, if he had been the one to die at this point, he wouldn't have been able to say, I love you, or I'm sorry, before he dies and is pulled under. That would be very heart-wrenching. And then Shanna would have to feel all that guilt of betraying her friend, and now they don't get closure. And so, it snowballs from there. I feel like that would have been a much better situation for emotional turmoil, in addition to their physical danger. If you disagree, let me know. I mean, it kind of becomes a moot point because Sam ends up dying anyway from his wounds, saving Casey. But I feel like story, like progression-wise, this would have made more sense. Because Woody, had he lived where Sam lives and then dies, it would have been like this final thing, like, doing something for his best friend, saving the woman he loved, and then succumbing to his wounds. That would have been a much better, I think, outcome for that. And much more emotional payoff, and make everyone distraught. I feel bad that Aya died, but her and Julie's deaths were very much necessary. It's a trope, and it's a phrase I think most people are familiar with, the sacrificial lamb. They're really just there to be killed and for you to feel sorry for them. And their deaths were very much this. There was really nothing more to it than that. And I feel bad for that. I feel like if they had been more prominent in the story, there might have been more going on. But at the same time, like, this is, her story, so it makes sense. But do you know what I mean? Their characters are just there to be killed. There's really nothing more to them. For instance, I'm working on a book. There's a character I have. He's very important. He's very prominent. But no matter what he does or where we go with him, he will die. And if I just had a character, he shows up, he explains some things, he does a few things, and then he dies, that's pretty boring. But if I have this character, and he goes on this journey, and he does all this, and he fights, and he just keeps going, and then all of his effort and hard work and everything pays off and he dies, there's going to be that feeling of unfulfillment. You know, you as the reader will feel like this character died before he could accomplish what he set out to do, and that's going to cause a lot of emotional baggage. You know, you projecting yourself onto him, hopefully, and so you feel that disappointment, not only in like that he would have in himself, but that what he set out to do was not accomplished. Does that make sense? You know, the differences between like a sacrificial lamb and a sacrificial lion, I think is the phrase. Yes, those are the two tropes. Now, Shanna, I made no secret at all over the course of the book as I was reading it. I very much disliked her from the beginning. She reminds me of a lot of my sister's friends when she was younger. Like, a lot of them. It was bizarre. I was very much worried about my sister. So there's a lot of bias there in regards to not liking her. I could say she's a terrible character. She, you know, messed up the story. She's the reason for the story, you know. A story is setting, characters, and the conflict. She set up the conflict. She was responsible for the conflict. She didn't really set it up so much as she's the reason they were there. She's the reason they were there, so she's responsible for the conflict that they ended up in, which is, you know, survive. Alright. Oh, I get it. Let's see. What was I segueing into? What was I segueing into? Man, why did I have to make that stupid joke? Okay. So, I can say she's a terrible character, but that's just going to be me hating her character. That's not the same thing as... Just because you don't like something doesn't mean it's bad. You can not like something because it's bad, but they don't equal each other. I don't know what that was. Two snakes, I guess. She was a good character. She was just a terrible person. But I feel like there was too much focus on how much, I guess, of a rebel she was. The author went too far out of her way to make this person that way, and then tried too hard, too late, to make her more relatable and human. I mean, by the end, I felt genuinely sorry for her, but, you know, even in the story, Casey is very much aware that if she made it out alive, she's never going to change. She's too much gone. And it's too much a part of her as a person. And I guess if something had happened to make you think like she could come back from this if they were to escape with their lives, it would have been better for the story. Not now. And this kind of leads me back to, because it's about Shanna, a point I made earlier about like explaining things or not explaining things, and you know, versus one over the other. The scene in the hospital and the ending chapter, which I think will be about where I end this video because I'm pretty much done with the book as a whole, where Shanna's body gets brought in. We can see her, she's got the thing covered, although I guess it might have said that you could see her face, but I'm pretty sure it said like it was over. That usually means the person's dead. We see her pink hair, and then later she gets up and walks into Casey's room, and we're led to believe like everything is fine, and I'm not trusting this because I know the story well enough. Like, okay, this is a trap. This is a, well, not a trap. I think, what did I say? Okay, it's a nightmare. And then it turns out to be real. Shanna her body has been taken over by this thing, the tentacles that were in the sewer, or I guess in the subway. And there's too much asking of disbelief in regards to this, I feel personally, for me. And the reason for that is, okay, earlier with Aya, it was when she scratched at Casey's face, there was this blue light in her eyes. Like there was a glow about her that seemed to be causing her to lash out, literally, at Casey's face and kill her, presumably. What's the connection there to these tentacle monsters, and how did they, I guess, like hollow out Shanna and then operate her body to get out of the subway tunnel and get to the hospital? Admittedly, I think in a different setting, with a different story, that would have made it much more terrifying. How does this thing know how to track me down, essentially, is what she'd be asking herself. But in this story, the way it played out, it felt more like, shoot, what's it called? Ah, man, I can't remember how it's spelled, so I'm going to mispronounce it. Diabolus? Ex Machina? It's like a Deus Ex Machina where something happens, like say, God reached down, picked you up out of the water, and then put you back on land. You know, something out of nowhere. That's what do you call it? Used to fix the story once the author realizes they've put their character in a situation where they can't actually get themselves out. This is the opposite of that, where the devil comes in and changes the situation for the worst for no justifiable reason. I feel like Shanna's body being brought in, controlled by the tentacle monsters, is that. Now, had that not happened, and we just had gone straight into the thing where it's at the end of her chapter, the police don't even need to be mentioned, really, except for the fact that they went down there and they never found anybody. Like, anybody or any body. I mean, that would be good. And then it cuts to, because if you remember in that final chapter, as she's walking out of the hospital and she's mentioning in her inner monologue, she'll see someone that looks like one of her friends, and in the shadows of like the drains, she sees them staring back at her, and then she'll blink, and there's nothing there. There's a lot of tension there, because what if she's wrong? What if they actually were there? What if they're actually looking for her, trying to find her? That would have been a much better transition from her being in the hospital to her leaving, rather than having Shanna's body come back and do an invasion of the body snatchers and try and kill her. And why did strangling her work to kill her? Did the monster that took her over have its head up here and it needs oxygen too? I don't know, it tried too hard, I think, to be like emotionally distressing, you know, a friend having to kill her best friend after everything she went through, and just going from being so grateful that she's there alive, and then finding out it's a monster, and then having to kill her. It would have worked for a different setting. It didn't work in this particular story. Does that make sense? Now, I could be wrong. Maybe for you it did work. Maybe for you, you actually enjoyed what had happened. Well, not enjoyed it, but found it found it worked, and that's perfectly fine. I encourage everybody to have their own opinions and make those opinions known. Just me personally, I feel like something else should have happened. Admittedly, what I say should have happened actually did happen. That bit should have just been taken out. It detracted from the emotional toll the story had taken on the main character, Casey. Just for the sake of, not shock value, per se, which is a phrase I don't use often, but it was unnecessary for the story. Yeah, other than that, that's pretty much it. Like, overall, the deaths were pretty well done, if not over the top. Julie's eye falling out of her sockets and rolling up, and then happening to land and look up at Casey. That makes sense, you know. That's a pretty common thing. Like how whenever the hero throws his sword, it will always land blade first wherever it needs to. You know what I mean? It's gruesome, sure, but makes sense. Admittedly, at the time, we had no idea how. Now that I think about it, Julie was tied up on the pipes. Why did the tentacles tie her up? Unless she... I just thought about that. Maybe they didn't do that. Because remember, she was tied up on the thing. They couldn't get her down. Because they were too tight. What if there was somebody... What if it was Lawrence? What if somebody had tied her up there for unspeakable reasons, and then she just happened to be stuck there with the tentacles and they killed her? That's a question we'll never know, because, yeah, I guess we're just led to believe that the tentacle monsters were the ones that did that. Wow, this video ended up being a lot longer than it should have. But, see, this is why I don't like having a list, because I feel like I'm very much shoehorned into a tiny little space, and then if I can let my thoughts kind of, not really wander, but if I can let my thoughts explore, we can get a lot more out of this. Let me know if you would prefer, me making a list and, reading through it. I feel like a lot of me gets taken out of that, but, I'm here for you guys. So let me know. But yeah, that's gonna be a question that takes me out of the story. It's like, why did they tie her up? If the tentacles were what tied her up, were they what tied her up? If you question a story like that, like, why would they do this? Why wouldn't they do that? It takes you out of the setting, and then you lose that immersion, and it takes them out of that feeling of wanting to be in that story and know what's going to happen. So that's one thing that I'm trying really hard to keep in mind when I'm writing my story. If you guys would like to help at all in any way, feel free to let me know down in the comments, and I would love to name some characters after you, or base some characters off of ideas that you guys have. We'll go from there. Okay, so that's my 2 cents. I just remembered I have a playlist that's called Ben's 2 cents. Okay, I guess I know where this video is going. thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if I missed anything that I should have talked about, and we can talk about it in the comments. I feel like overall with this story, I said what needed to be said. I asked what needed to be asked. Um, and I gave criticisms, or critiques, we'll say. I came up with suggestions for making the story better. I didn't just hate on it like some people. Um, but yeah, let me know what you guys think. I think I've asked that, what, 5 times now? Sorry. Anyway, until next time. Goodbye, everybody. I also still haven't decided what I'm going to do for tomorrow. So, yeah.